I feel that people are too harsh on China in lots of ways, or rather they imagine a kind of malign China, which I don't think fits the reality. I find China to be rational and largely, let's call it peace-loving in this respect.
一位西方学者当着全球观众的面说出了一句让人震撼的话：美国已经不再是高人一等的那一层了。这个人叫达斯古普塔，英裔印度作家，全球化与帝国问题研究者。他的对面是英国媒体人巴斯塔尼。两个西方人坐在一起，开始解剖一个让他们自己都不安的问题。中国是怎么把美国给侧翼包抄的？这帮西方精英用70多年的时间，精心搭建了一套规则帝国、世界银行、世贸组织双边投资协定，口口声声说自由贸易，骨子里却是把全球穷国的资源源源不断地抽进西方的口袋，谁不服从就送来大使渗透，送来炮舰威胁，送来制裁，轮番施压这一套。他们自以为可以永远玩下去，但没想到中国用一种他们完全没有预料到的方式悄悄绕过了这整套系统。不是正面硬撞，不是以牙还牙，而是在那些美国企业根本看不上的地方默默扎根，默默建设，一步一步让整个美国世界秩序从侧翼开始瓦解。让我们来看达斯古普塔究竟说出了哪些连西方自己都坐不住的真相。
America is reconfiguring its relationship to the global system considerably.
I mean, you even have Trump, rather than extraterritoriality as the principal, Trump is just overtly saying, let's have Greenland, let's have Canada.
No, but that's the thing. I think these are the clear signs that America is now an equivalent power to China or Russia. It is no longer in some other layer of the global system. It is in the same layer, doing the same kinds of things, and realizing that because China has outflanked this system that was a very formal system of law and markets, by which America took hold of a lot of the basic resources of the world. China, which does not have the same commitment by any means to the nation state as the fundamental unit of global administration. China has done deals with lots of people who are not nation states, warlords, and all kinds of factions within states, and has sent in companies into places that American corporations can't function, and is extracting much more efficiently than those parts of the world. So America is having to catch up with China and do things that it hasn't done for decades, such as simply contemplate conquering places or seizing their oil on the high seas. These are very 18th century things.
How did China do that? Because China jumped through all the hoops that you've talked about in terms of how American empire is administered. It's a civilization state, but it's a nation state. It was, it joined the WTO in 2000.
Yeah.
It adopted market economics. It welcomed American firms.
Yeah.
It buys lots of US treasuries. So how did China manage to outflank the United States and actually elevate itself to a sort of new level of not being a client, but actually increasingly a rival?
Well, I think it is very explicit within the Chinese Communist Party that the restoration of sort of Qing dynasty power levels of power that last seen in the Qing dynasty is very much the stated ambition of the Chinese Communist Party. The idea of China existing at the center of a tributary system, a benign state, but also a superior state. I think that is so. Yes, China, for historical reasons, was made a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN in 1945. So it has had this historical commitment to the institutions that America has designed. It has played that game quite well generally, and has in many ways been much more respectful of those institutions than America has. But China today has found ways of infiltrating states in places like Central Asia and Africa, and bits of Asia and Latin America too, which go far beyond what America has had as its repertoire. And that has partly become because of the dislike that much of the world accumulated for the Soviet Union and for America during the Cold War. This allowed China to go in and say, we're not those guys. we are equal to you. We have experience of being colonized. We've suffered from these superpowers. We understand your traumas and your histories, and we will not treat you in those kinds of ways. We will not dictate to you how you should manage your population or what your foreign policy should be or what laws you should have on property. And we will barter with you. We will build your highways. We will give money to your police force. We'll give you equipment, training, all those kinds of things, in return for access to resources, in return for timber, in return also for immunity, because a lot of Chinese companies also don't want to be prosecuted because a lot of them are doing very illegal things to get some of this stuff out of the ground. So a lot of these deals, they have not necessarily had the same kind of financial burdens or the same political burdens that American deals have done, and countries have leapt at them. And China, therefore, has got this incredible footprint. But now, and I've spent a lot of time in Africa recently, a lot of those countries are seeing the immense costs of that Chinese presence because there are no fish in the ocean anymore, or there is no timber anymore in the forests. The farmers can't farm anymore because the land, let's say in Ghana, is so poisoned by gold mining that cocoa farming is now an impossible activity. So it's a very, very extreme presence, the Chinese presence, the one with a conception of nature, the total exploitation of nature, which has governed Chinese policy since BC, is extended to the world, and we're seeing very, very deep ecological problems as a result.
Do you think you're too harsh on China in that regard? Because, I mean, this is a really interesting conversation about, China is one of the few countries in the world which is presently seeing reforestation, not least because it's actually outsourced lots of things like, timber, expropriations from, Liberia or wherever in the continent of Africa. But there is at least, look, China is, formally speaking, on a per capita basis, a middle-income country.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily unusual for a middle-income country to be producing something like 40% of global manufacturing output, and its CO2 emissions have peaked. Probably, it seems, right? I mean, that's an accomplishment that really is kind of at odds with this idea that it is just as rapacious. Its relationship to nature is just the same as that of Britain and the United States in the last couple of centuries. I mean, you think there is a lot of continuity there. So for people who are eager to kind of amplify China's claims to climate leadership, what do you say to that?
Well, I think that I feel that people are too harsh on China in lots of ways, or rather they imagine a kind of malign China, which I don't think fits the reality. For instance, I don't think China, this is a very American idea, for instance, I don't think China is set on a World War III confrontation with the United States. It doesn't fit Chinese history. I find China to be rational and largely, let's call it peace-loving in this respect. I think its idea of how Chinese power is accumulated is not the sort of military showdown of 1940s that America has so much in its history. And I think that the achievement or the economic achievement is without a doubt almost unparalleled in global history. I've done interviews about this book with Chinese students dispatched by newspapers and magazines in China who are now studying at Oxford or Cambridge, and their parents were factory workers. And the incredible benefits of this system they are to some extent the kind of promises of communism in the 1920s, that we will have factory worker intellectuals, that everybody will. It is extraordinary, but no, I'm not sanguine about Chinese credentials as a green power. You said that they're just as bad as Britain or America. I think they're much worse. Yes, China is got an idea of its continental landmass, which is increasingly green. It is seeking to do things in China that will protect the land and its population for decades or centuries to come. but I think it's exporting a level of kind of, precisely because it's so productive and so efficient. Its demands in terms of raw materials are just astronomical. And a lot of those demands are outsourced to very informal players who have no particular kind of scrutiny, it's legal scrutiny with regard to their labor practices and their environmental practices. Those could be Chinese players or local players who have often got close links to corrupt brokers in the political system or the top of the economic system in those countries, and it's playing havoc. I think it's, as I say, I think American corporations actually faced legal limits on what they could do because they were in a formal context. A lot of what's informally happening across the world today is, when you see it, and I've seen it recently in places like Ghana, is quite terrifying.
看完这场对话，我说实话，心里有一种说不清楚的畅快感，不是幸灾乐祸，而是因为这一次说出真相的人是他们自己。一个在西方主流学术圈打滚多年的学者，用他们最熟悉的语言，把美国帝国的逻辑拆了个底朝天。这里面有一个很值得玩味的现象，社会学上叫做认知双重标准。同一个事实，说话者的身份不同，接受程度就完全不一样。我们说美国在全球榨取资源叫反西方宣传，达斯古普塔说同样的话叫学术分析，但今天这道防火墙被他们自己拆掉了一块。我们再来看美国这套规则帝国到底是怎么运作的。打个比方，就像街区里的一个大混混，他不直接抢你的钱，他制定了一套街区规则，做生意要给他抽成，借钱要用他的钱庄，谁不守规矩就让手下来拜访你，美其名曰维护秩序。这就是世界银行世贸组织美元体系几十年来干的事。但中国呢？中国去找了那些在这个街区里一直被欺负的小店主，说了一句话：我们也被欺负过，我们懂你的苦，你需要修路吗？需要建桥吗？我帮你。就这样，非洲、中亚、拉丁美洲那些美国企业根本看不上的地方，中国用基建换资源，用尊重换信任，在美国完全没设防的侧翼悄悄打开了一个又一个缺口。达斯古普塔提到了一个数字，值得我们好好记住：中国一个名义上仍是中等收入的经济体，却生产了全球将近 40% 的制造业，产值 40%， 一个国家撑起全球工厂产能的将近一半，这在人类历史上几乎没有先例。我们用1代人的时间，让数亿人口脱离绝对贫困，同时成为全球最大的制造业国家，还在加速推进清洁能源转型。连巴斯塔尼自己都说，这真的是一种成就，跟那种纯粹掠夺性的帝国逻辑是有根本差别的。这不是在追赶西方，这是在创造一个新的标准。而美国在干什么？达斯古普塔的话像一面镜子，特朗普公开嚷着要拿下格陵兰，要收回加拿大，这是18世纪殖民者的语言。一个宣称代表自由世界的超级大国退化到直接讲征服这2个字，这意味着什么？意味着那套精心设计的法律与市场帝国已经开始失去效力了。中国绕过去了，其他国家也学着绕过去了。美国的工具箱里只剩下最原始的那一把赤裸的武力威胁。历史有它自己的逻辑，每一个霸权都曾相信自己建立的秩序是永恒的。大英帝国如此日不落的骄傲，最终还是在20世纪中叶落了山。当一个帝国开始用抢占领土的语言替代规则与法律的语言，它的顶点已经过去了。我们中国从来不追求成为新的霸主，中华文明5000年的底色是己所不欲，勿施于人，是天下大同，不是把全世界的资源都吸进自己的口袋。这一点是我们与那些帝国最根本的不同。不是他们说的，是历史说的。你们看完这个视频怎么想？欢迎在评论区告诉我，你觉得中国的这条路走对了吗？